I wanted to start with a quote. Is that right? Can I start with a quote?
Okay. Okay. Great. Sure.
Creativity is one of the survival mechanisms of our collective souls. I refuse to believe that our story will end with capitalism and cynicism snuffing out the magnanimous artistic impulse that has been with us since the beginning of recorded history. Never forget that we have the power to shape the art world we want. Discuss.
It's pretty thorough, isn't it? Well, I that comes from my book, and when I wrote that book, I was trying to essentially pass on to the next generation uh the idea that art has power to shape our environment. And I think that for a long time now, we've been sort of veering over to the commercial and the entrepreneurial, and I can see the benefit of that. We're fighting against the starving artist trope, and I want people to make money, but the idea is that art has always been a powerful force that did help shape our history, and I don't want people to forget that. And I think it's very easy to forget that in the environment that we're surrounded with. I mean, it really, literally, everywhere you look, we've got advertisements, and people are paying for our attention, and so. Um, I just wanted to make a kind of last plea for art as meaning, and art as sustenance. So that's basically what that's about.
Let's talk about the book. It's called Art from Your Core. I've I'm going to say
Mhm.
I've dipped in and out of it because it's quite the tome. I think it's magnificent,
Yes,
if
it
I may
is.
say so. It's magnificent. It's
Thank
very
you.
brave. It's very bold, and I like the fact that I think you said it's written with students in mind, but I think it's written for
Mhm.
anybody who wants to be creative. And to me, it just feels like it's partly a sort of toolkit, isn't it?
Yes,
But I think
absolutely.
it's there to sort of help
Um,
people negotiate their own paths. I've had this conversation quite a lot with people about the creative path, but it seems as though
mhm.
you've very much thought this through, put a kind of process in place, and then really you're just holding people's hands as they get brave with themselves.
Exactly. This class existed as a regular semester class, and it also exists as a workshop. And so I had the whole thing kind of laid out before I started writing the book. But um, the idea is that akin to therapy, we sort of strip away all of the negative influences that might have steered you in wrong directions. And then we do some exercises to sort of help you get to know yourself and build your own core. And the idea is that we most artists that I admire anyway, they don't just get a great idea. They actually are carrying out a sustained investigation over the course of their life. And so I think that I've seen a lot of people teaching for 30 years. I've seen a lot of people who kind of go off on one path and then, make a big turn and decide to change, and then another one and another one, but they're not building on anything, and they're not stopping to kind of consider who they are and what their unique point of view is. And that's something that's pretty impossible to teach in a classroom because you might have 20 or 30 students, but I found a way to individualize it. So that's what's different about it, I guess, is it's got all these exercises, and each person's going to come up with very different answers, and then we kind of put them all together, and people will sort of discover the art that they were born to make. And usually people come out with a couple of good ideas for what direction they might want to go in, but I also give them the tools to figure out what needs to be made next and how to determine that. And the last part of the book is strengthening.
Mm.
So it's intensifying your voice, distilling your voice, because, um, what artists are doing is they're, I say, they make their own, secret sauce, and then they make their own, whatever, their own cookies, their own crackers, and they dip the meat crackers in the meat sauce, and they are distilling themselves. They are kind of getting down to what they alone have to say and what's unique to them. So, um, and we talk about fear a lot,
Mm.
and that's something that I know a lot about. So, um, I love uh, the idea that when I start making something, I don't know if it's going to turn out or not. That's like the most exciting thing to me. So, a lot of people, talk to me about bravery. And so I figured that that's something that really deserved to be
Yeah,
discussed.
I suppose that the thrill of which you speak is also the thing that terrifies the bejesus out of someone in the first part of their journey, isn't it? It's the same feeling, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, often promise my students an A if they'll take the risk. I don't care how it turns out, because they could dance around that for months or even years. So, I'm really trying to kind of cut through all of that, and you know, I I also talk about listening to the universe, which, if somebody would have said that to me 30 years ago, I would have rolled my eyes and said, "Oh, this person's way too flaky for me." But a lot of the artists that I admire when I read their biographies and such, they're following something that wants to come through them. And so, um, I use Philip Guston as an example because he had these figures that he's famous for. They were trying to fight through and come out for 10
Mm.
years. And so after that, in all of his interviews, he talks about trusting the voice, or the third hand, or, he refers to it in different ways, but sort of brushing all the exterior stuff away and saying what's trying to get out.
I'm always fascinated by people, and I've interviewed a few in previous episodes of this, people who can't help but make the work. People who have to because the work is just
Yes.
coming through them and it's all they can do to just get it out with a needle and thread. Like, I find that quite a fascinating thing because there's such a purity to that. And I guess there are different degrees, aren't there? I want to, do you think everybody, well, I know you think everybody has an artistic voice, right?
I do. I
And
do.
do you think that the skill is then to understand the voice and to not second guess yourself? Would that be a fair way of putting it?
That would be yes, because there's so many forces that um are coming at you, trying to steer you in one direction or another, especially in school.
Mm.
I've had students come to me and say, "Well, this professor said this, and this professor said that, and I don't know what to do." And so I talk about what do you do with feedback? Like, how do you? And I use the metaphor of
Hmm.
eating. You take a taste of something and you spit it back out. That's not for you. Or you take a taste of something and you're like, okay, that's interesting, but I don't want any more. Or you take a taste of something and you're saying, yes, like this is the best thing I've ever tasted. I want more. And so I think people's opinions are like that too. You have to be able to parse out when somebody has an agenda, when, you know, they they themselves were taught 30 years ago that, abstract work is the most spiritual, or political work is didactic, or whatever, because we've all got these voices in our head. So that's why I'm trying to strip everything away. And, we do that before we start investigating what wants to come through
And
us.
that's like a, v- I was going to say it's a very modern condition, but to peel away the marketing messages, and I use that term pretty broadly, but the messages we're told by other
Uh-huh.
people for agendas that serve their purposes or whatever, sometimes that feels
Right.
impossible, right?
It does. It does, because 'cause they're coming at us from every direction, and I mean, I think that social media has put another layer on that because we all want likes,
Mm,
right? We all want people to say, "Oh, that's brilliant." And, the fact is that when you're pushing boundaries, rarely do people say that. It takes time to process what you're doing for the audience. And so, um, I think that we're in an especially dangerous time because there's this temptation all the time to, say, well, everyone loved the red one. Let me do another red one. And that's going to take you down a path that is their path. It's not your path, you know? And I say, in the book, would you have a committee in your studio telling you what to make? And everybody says, "Oh, no, 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 no." And then I say, "Well, why is catering to likes any different? It's the same thing."
yeah. What's the trade-off between that principle of like following your own artistic voice and then trying to make a living?
Well, I address that. There's a sort of elephant in the room chapter. Um, and I think that that's another thing, and I make a lot of suggestions from all the artists that I've known. People do it in different ways. I'm not trying to preach one way or another. Um, some people make smaller things that they know people will buy, and then they save their experimental stuff. Other people have something that's totally separate that they do to earn money, and then, you know, I mean, I teach and now I write. Um, and I'm thinking about retiring from teaching, and I'm actually considering, a different business that I uh, think I would enjoy. But I think everybody's got to make that decision for themselves. And my message is just don't neglect what you feel you need to do. I just think it's really easy, and I've done it. I know this. It's really easy to keep putting off that thing that you want to try, and so it sometimes even success gets in the way. Everyone wants a hair embroidery and they're all out at other shows. And so, oh no, I need another hair embroidery. And before you know it, 2 years have passed and I haven't, gotten to try that thing I want to try. And so, um, that's all I'm advocating for, that you save some part for your core voice.
And do you think that one of the mistakes that people might make when pursuing their own artistic agenda is thinking that it's got to be something big? And that maybe like I was just thinking about my next door neighbor, right? A
Hmm.
lady called Viv. She's in
Yeah.
her 70s and she makes Welsh cakes
Oh, okay,
and she just
cool.
gives them to people.
Right.
And in some ways, that's kind of like her art,
Yeah,
because she
of
just does it
course.
and she's very driven to do it. And it's not like she's not looking to exhibit them in galleries. She's not looking
Mhm.
to make 16-foot high towers out of them. It's like
Yeah.
a quiet art. And I sometimes think that's what I mean. Sometimes I think we make a mistake because we think that it's got to be something dramatic. It's got to be something, but to me, it feels like the art is just that expression of you. Whether it's just you've got a really tidy lawn, but that's your art, isn't it? It can be that sort of reflection.
Right. I believe that as well, and my creativity manifests itself all over my house and all over my lawn, and, I mean, I just think we need that as human beings, and I think we need it now more than ever because it's that tactility. We need to touch things, we need to interact with things. Everything is a screen. It's all just sort of smooth and glossy, and we're human beings, and I feel like we're neglecting this whole other side of ourselves. I mean, you probably see that. There are so many more people, I think, doing different kinds of needlework than there were before. I mean, I just think that people need to do things with their hands. So,
I, I think it's such a double-edged sword. Like I look at Instagram and I think Instagram really accelerated the inspiration for people, made
sure.
it easier to see that, made it much more accessible. But it
Mhm.
is such a double-edged sword, like you say, because I don't think we are designed to process the dopamine fix that you get. There's all of these systems, aren't there? And
Yeah.
it's the same with like ultra processed foods. Like we're not designed to handle flavor enhancers that we've been giving ourselves for 50 years or whatever. And I just think it's trying to find that balance, isn't it? And trying to sort of explain that. I've
Mhm.
got two young children who aren't into phones yet, and at some point
Mhm.
they will be because they see them. And I'm sort of secretly hoping that a lot of these systems might have broken by
Right.
the time that they get there, because then you've got half a chance.
Me too.
It
Yeah.
feels really hard to sort of undo it. But I mean, in the book, there's a section I was quite drawn to where you talk about the crisis of meaning, and I think that
Mhm.
that's really important because I think back in the day we didn't have messages bombarded at us, so we could just find ourselves for better or worse. Whereas now there's a really great documentary called A Century of a Self, which just talks about, it's an Adam Curtis documentary, and it talks about, 150 years of marketing messages that have been underpinned by
Right.
psychology and how we just don't know. We
Right.
don't know that we're being marketed to half the time, but it feels
Mm.
like that's the crisis that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And the reason that the book is called a holistic guide to visual voice is because of that. Because um, I think that it's our job as artists to cultivate meaningful lives, to make meaningful art, whatever that art is, whether the rest of the world is appreciating it or not. But um, I've had students come up to me and like show me their work, and they're like, it's just there's not, there's something missing in this work, and I think it's hard to uh know who you are and have a strong sense of that without making deliberate efforts to shut out some of the noise. And so there's a whole chapter that, nobody wants to read, but is going to want to read called The Noise. And
Mm,
that's the most scientific chapter. That's the one that really tells us, hey, if you go away on a camping trip for 5 days, your creativity will be boosted by 50% when you get back. And, um, I'm not a Luddite. I use the internet. I use my phone, but I set timers because
mm,
I, you know, I want to own my life. I want to be proactive and not reactive. And I think that the way we're being bombarded, it puts us in a position where we're reacting to that all the time. When your phone buzzes, even if it's not ringing, you have a startle response, which is
right.
stress, right? And so you know, a lot of times if you're distracted by something, they say it takes you up to 20 minutes to get back to what you were doing if you ever
Mm,
return at all. So, these are things that I'm always thinking about this, like somebody invents some great new thing, and then who is doing the research to figure out whether this is good for us or not. And usually that comes later. The scientists catch up when we have a problem, you know, where
yeah.
when parents talk to their kids and their kids won't answer because they're plugged in. So,
Mm,
I advocate for trying to build a life that has meaning for yourself, and to have some quiet in built into your life too, because we're all so busy, um, to be able to think. That's how we gestate, I mean, people
mm.
always joke about getting good ideas in the shower, and it's probably the only time that we're alone without without something,
Yeah.
affecting us.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right, isn't it? Until they create a fully waterproof phone, and then we're completely screwed. But
Speakers.
yeah, but I think it's true. I mean, I think that in some ways that's where needlework has an advantage over some other art forms. I think because you can't rush it. you have to take your time, and that slowness is kind of inherent in part of the process, isn't it? And that's the slowness that, for me, the meditativeness of it was the thing that got me in the first place.
Hmm.
Do you like, I guess, yeah, I suppose you're in agreement with that because of your personal practice anyway. I just wonder, do
Hmm.
you, when you're teaching students, are they across all different kinds of media and disciplines?
I have, yes. Yeah, I've taught painting and color theory, and I teach visual voice classes and drawings primarily what I'm teaching right now.
I
But
wonder whether you just notice any difference between certain applications of media and that like thoughtfulness process, whether there are some like needlework that lend themselves to a bit more philosophical reflection by the nature of the process.
I think that people are drawn to the people that are drawn to do needlework um understand and appreciate that slowness, and that it's meditative, and that it's reparative in some cases. It feels that way anyway. And so uh I know I have students who would never do needlework, who, because I teach it even in my drawing classes. I teach in the like the second or the third drawing class, I teach them needlework as mark making. And
Right.
you've always got the ones who've got the knots and the, like, and then you have people who just hook into it and that's all they do,
Mm.
So I think there's something very special about working with a needle and thread and with fabric, where it's something we're all really familiar with. Um, and I for me, I feel like it is a calming process in and of
Mm.
itself, you know, and I can take it anywhere. I can
That
I can take it to the doctor's office. I've always got this bag with me.
Because the thing I'm appreciating the calmness, because I think one of the things I've always felt with your work, bearing in mind that I guess I've known of you for like over a decade now, which is a bit mad, really, but um, it has always been a good bit of rage. I've always felt like with you, there's always some rage in Kate's work in some form or another,
Mhm.
even before it became like overtly political, even in
Oh,
the
yeah.
early days of oubliettes and those kind of things. It was kind of there was a darkness, there was a sort of sinisterness there. There was something that you were, whether you were trying to exercise it from your system or whether you were just looking at the world around you, I'm not sure which way it came, but there's always been this, yeah, darkness.
Mhm. Um, I think it's both. I think I'm still exercising it from my system, but I think that, originally the work was probably more personal, just the family dysfunctionality and all that kind of stuff. And then when my daughter was born, I just started looking at the world around me in a completely different way. And um I feel this sounds like a very naive thing to say, but I feel like I'm trying to fix the world for my daughter. And I'm not arrogant enough to think that I can, but I do think that sometimes you can budge the needle just a little bit in the right direction. I'm pretty good at getting my work out in front of people. So, um, yeah, I think that now I'm responding to the outside world, whereas kind of in the first half of my career, I was responding to the inside.
As an aside, I never really understand why, as a parent, like you do things yourself that you don't want your children to do because you know that they're bad for them. Why do we do that all the
I,
time? It's like,
I,
don't eat this thing.
well, I'm the oldest sibling, and so uh, I even did that with my brothers and sisters. There's this whole thing inside where you're like, I survived, but I was just lucky,
Yeah.
and but the world changes, and there are threats that didn't exist. I mean, what
Hmm.
did we do? We were running around playing all day long and came in when we were called for supper. And no one knew where we were, what we were doing, I think my daughter's fascinated by all this, and she asked me the other day, uh, about my childhood, and I said, "Yeah, I remember my mom giving me money and sending me to the store for a carton of milk when I was 4 years old."
Mm.
It was right down the street. And it's not like bad things didn't exist back then, but we read about them now a lot more, and the internet's an additional danger, especially when you have girls, it seems. So
I wonder whether that's a thing, like you say, it's like our parents. I don't know if it was naive or maybe the world sort of isn't that bad. If we turn down the volume and all the
right,
things telling us the world that's bad, then maybe we'd all feel the same way about that. But yeah,
right.
it's always a funny duality. Let's talk about childhood. Let's not just as a broad concept. Let's talk about your childhood, because I
Mhm.
know that you've been stitching and making art for a long time. Have you been sort of making art from a small child onwards?
Yes. I think I started seriously drawing in 4th or 5th grade, but I was always doing crafts. I had embroider on your jeans crafts and things like that. Um, Sometimes I didn't finish them. I remember that if I wasn't really interested in them, they didn't get finished. But yeah, I've always liked to make things with my hands, and I've always been somewhat introverted too. I need time for myself that's quiet, and that was hard in a house, of 7 people. So,
Yeah, how many siblings have you got?
I've got 2 brothers and 2 sisters. They're all younger than
Right, right. So was there a period where you had time for yourself and then they came along and you just went, "Oh, that's the end of that
I don't really remember back that far, but we're
then?"
like the first 3 of us are super close in age. Like,
Right.
we're all a year and a half away from each other. So we were sort of one pack, and then there was a period of time for 2 younger. So that, we all did plays together, the 3 of us. And, my mother taught us before we went to kindergarten. My dad was a high school teacher, so he got some old desks that were being thrown away, and, she would actually hold classes for us. I suppose it's an easy way to get all 3 of us in one place paying
Mm,
attention.
yeah. And so are you all quite creative? Was there a lot of that happening?
I think so. I mean, in different areas. Um you know, my youngest brother is a DJ, and my brother, does shows for people like Armani and stuff like that. I mean, he makes all the visuals on the screen
Okay.
behind them. So, and then we've got a scientist. We don't know where she came from, but she's brilliant too.
Just to balance things out in a sort of karmic
It's it's
scale or
a
something.
it's a biology thing. Someone told me that, in order for us to survive, your kids have to be different from one another so that one of them will be likely to succeed where the other one might not, or be more adaptable to conditions. So that's,
Not sure I want to know that fact, because then you spend the rest of your time just wondering if you're the
well,
one.
it's not. I know I'm the
Yeah, there you go.
one.
Did you do a lot of needlework type stuff at school?
Mm, not at all. I I'm about to make a confession, um,
Hmm.
on this particular podcast. I think there was a period of time when I was an undergraduate where I was a voracious reader, and I had read about the hierarchy of art, and
Okay.
I had a little button that said, "I don't do crafts."
Mic drop.
Right? I know, I know, but, and I went to a graduate school that was really well known for fiber art, and I never took a class, and I could beat myself now for not doing that. It was really, several years into my professional career when I was painting, but I've always liked to make things for my house. So I started to make these things, and then curators would come over and they'd be picking paintings for a show. And then they'd wander over to some little thing that I'd sewn, and they'd say, "I want to put this in the show." And I'd be like, "Really?" So um and I think that time coincided with when I got tenure at my university. And so that is a very freeing
Mm,
thing. There are people who could argue when I came up for tenure, oh, she's all over the place, which is where I am right now. Um, but I really wanted tenure. I really wanted to be in the lifeboat. So um, I was kind of doing my thing, and I was getting shows, and I was, I've always been sort of DIY in my art career. So, when I had a chance to show with a gallery, I was like, no, I need to get tenure, and my work needs to be circulating at all times. And so I didn't go the gallery route because of that. I may have, cut off my nose to spite my face, but I literally was driving my work all over the country in a rental
right.
truck at that
But
point.
at that point, it was mostly like painting that kind of territory.
Yeah.
Right.
hmm And then tenure, and then boom. Fiber fiber got started, more momentum. And I think now the last painting that I did, I finished maybe, I don't know, 4 years
Right.
ago, 3, 4 years ago. So
And then when, like, for instance, with your use of hair, when did those kind of ideas start to creep in?
um well, I was thinking about what is the most potent material that you could use in terms of meaning, right? And hair uh, can be red like the rings of a tree. So you look at it, you chop a tree down, you can see drought, you can see, any disease years where they then survived afterwards or whatever. And the same thing happens with your hair. So uh, if you're pregnant, if you go through a time of extreme stress, that's visible in your
Mm,
hair. And so, to my mind, that got me started on this idea that, wow, if I make art and I sew with hair, it already has this inherent meaning in it. And like, I just thought that's really the most potent art material I can think of. Our experiences are like in
mm,
there. So um, that developed even more because in the beginning I was using my own hair, and then I was thinking about formal aspects like value, and so then I bought some hair for a while, but then I decided it's really all about where this hair
right.
comes from. And so I made the nest, which is made from the hair that was on my head when I was carrying my daughter. And I made, um, my silver dagger, which um, I crowdsourced the gray hair of all these women. And I just think about it as all of us sitting in a room and telling our stories, it's all in
Mm.
there. So, I really like feel that, but I don't know how many I have in me, if any at all, because it's an excruciating process the way I do it. Some people do it in a more loosey goosey way, but the way that I do it, tying a knot in the beginning, sewing, tying a knot in the end. It's taken, a couple years off the use of my hands. So it would have to be a pretty important piece for me to do another one, I think.
Is it like fragile or not fragile, or does it depend and you only find out that it's fragile when it breaks on you?
You find out when it breaks on you, but I can tell you right now that um, the blonde hair that I've used breaks easier. And I don't know if that's because it wasn't really blonde hair, it was
Okay.
processed, or it inherently um, breaks. And one of the things that's really interesting if you're kind of getting into it is that the hair that's close to your head is much thicker than the hair at the very end. So I can start stitching an area with hair, and I'm trying to maintain a certain value across the area, and then it will either suddenly get lighter or darker depending upon which end of the hair I finish with. And so I've had to rip out those stitches and then, test and find another hair that's of similar thickness that I can use to finish up the area of stitching. So it's pretty
I was
obsessive.
gonna. It sounds like there are other media that might be simpler to use as a whole, or something.
Yes, yes, yes. Although I find gold thread harder to use
Right.
than hair. I
Interesting.
think that's really a challenge.
I think that the other thing that strikes me is, as you said, you start using it because it's an interesting material, but you can't help but then have it as like a narrative device. You can't
Hmm.
disconnect like the way it's come, and it's just not the same, is it, with cotton or some of these abstract things or polyester? You never
No,
really, yeah.
no.
It's funny how those voices of those people kind of spoke to you or made you pay
Hmm.
attention to it. I was particularly taken. I think it's Rupture as well, isn't it? The one that's like
Hmm.
a broken piece of glass or whatever, like a bullet
It's
hole,
yeah,
right?
it's a bullet hole in glass, and there, luckily, I have lots of Facebook friends. There, I crowdsourced from people who had experienced extreme loss that either was recent and they had shorter hair, or it might have, happened a few years ago, but they have longer hair. And so I wanted, so the rupture is not just the rupture in the glass, referring to gun violence, but it's a rupture in the time before and after the incident, which, gives me chills even when I'm talking about it. This whole, like, how your life gets transformed by loss. Um, and so that's where that came from. And it, yeah, it's a strange piece. It's really hard to see from a distance,
Hmm.
It's something that you've really got to get up on top of. But one of the great things about hair, especially gray hair, is that it's not white, it's translucent or almost transparent. And
Okay.
so when you shine a light on it in a gallery, it glistens like metal. And
Right.
so like glass,
Hmm.
so that was the glass and the metal that and I didn't know that when I started. That was just a happy accident that I, figured this out somewhere down the road that, and it's pretty amazing, actually. It's kind of like those funky lights that have the sort of
Hmm.
LED at the very tip,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's what it's like. It sort of carries light. So it's
Hmm.
really interesting.
I think isn't polar bear hair supposed to be the same? Like I think
I don't know.
I think polar bears like their hair's transparent, but there's so much of it, and I think their skin's quite dark, but it comes off as white because it's
Oh, that's
reflecting the light
interesting.
around it and stuff. I think
I've
that's
never
true.
used polar bear hair. I think that would be maddening.
That would
So
be.
I'm not going to try
I'm
it.
not, just not going to try and get that from the source at all. When you did the rupture piece, did you? I mean, people sent you hair in. Like I've done a few crowdsourced projects, and people always want to
Hmm.
tell you the tales of them. But I would.
Yes.
My thought is that with a project like that, you could personally get a bit overwhelmed by all those tales. Did you say, "I just want the hair," or did you leave it open for people to share what they wanted to?
I left it open, and a couple of people shared their stories, but um, most of them did not, and that's fine with me.
Hmm.
Um, I sort of trust them, and I take them at
Hmm.
their word, and um, that I knew there were stories. That's all I needed to know.
Mm.
that they
Yeah.
experience the emotion and they experience the disruption.
I guess there's a gamble, isn't there, with something like that, that actually the stories change the path that you'd have sort of started out on or something, and it might change the conversation you're having as part of that work or something.
Um, to a certain extent, I just think it was sort of, broad enough.
Mm.
My crowdsourcing definition was sort of broad enough because, I had people who'd lost lovers and people who'd lost children, and just lots of different stories. But to me, it was about the transformation part, the transformation in the hair, the transformation in the life.
I want to ask a question from the standpoint of
Hmm.
someone based in the UK who is not particularly, let's say, I don't know. I understand politics over here, don't fully understand politics over there. And I don't want this to become a
Hmm.
long political discourse. But seeing as how you're here, seeing as how it's a topic that I know you're familiar with,
Okay.
how can it
Hmm.
be that a man that used to be the president, who is facing loads of criminal charges, can get to nearly be the president again? How is it
Oh
that
my God,
you can be a
please. I
criminal?
can't. I can't. You know, the people who support him talk about him living rent free in our heads, and that is the truth, because the amount of worry that he causes in so many of our citizens, and the disbelief, really, the disbelief. And so my work is, I tried to make it, because there were so many lies being thrown around. I think somebody counted and said 30,000 while he was
Hmm.
president. um, I wanted to create concrete manifestations of the truth. It was for my sanity, as well as people that I know, because there's just, it's been a long, long time that people get together and they just say, oh my God, I can't fathom what is happening. And, I think, in a way, the work I make is a way to just feel like I'm making something to fight against it. Um, I, I go to protests, I do all kinds of things, but um, I don't know. It's kind of calling out the truth amidst not just lies, but massive gaslighting, because there's parts of the media that, perpetuate his agenda. And you know I'm terrified.
Hmm.
We renewed my daughter's passport this year.
Right.
I mean, we're ready. And you know uh I did a lot of research on, you know how Hitler came to power,
Hmm.
and I'm not going to get into it, but it's fascinating to watch history repeating itself, and the obliviousness that accompanies it. So,
Hmm.
well, we may be packing our bags. I don't know. And people keep telling me. I keep telling them what my next piece is going to be, which I hope is sort of a capstone for my MAGA hat pieces. And people say, that it's an election year. You shouldn't be making that. You know, take
Hmm.
all the bumper stickers off your car. They say that, they might go after artists or journalists or whatever. And it's hard to fathom that reality, but, he's probably one of the most vindictive people on the planet. So,
It's
you
just
know,
quite. I want to at some point have a needle exchange with Diana Weimar, who did the Tiny Pricks project,
oh, yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
I want to say to her, I bet you thought you'd finished, because I think that's the thing that gets me is you thought, like with your
Yeah,
work, you
yeah,
thought, okay, well
right,
now it comes to an end, but
right.
it doesn't seem to be coming to an end. That's the bewildering thing.
Yeah, I'm working on like a monumental piece compared to all the others, and it's I'm kind of shifting a little bit towards the followers, because, you know, one crazy person can just be walking down the street muttering to themselves, but it's all the other enablers,
Mm.
both political and, citizens who are allowing this to happen. And so that's kind of where I'm going next. And I pray that this is the last one. I really pray that it is.
Mm. But let's talk about some of the early works though, because I think there's a sort of an iterative process, I guess, where you did some work and then you started doing the MAGA hats, and
Yeah.
then you did the flag. And I mean, can you just tell
hmm
us about some of those projects?
Um, let's see. Well, I think when he was first in office, for the first year and a half, I was doing drawings. And they were just of his disembodied mouth captured mid-lie floating on a black background. So they were Prismacolors. They were really kind of lurid colors. And then I, I was doing a lot of research, and I said, I need to address this branding that he's done with this hat. And virtually all presidents almost have said, let's make America great again, but
Mm.
he's the one who turned it into a brand. And to be perfectly frank, like I said, I've done a lot of research, and I think that his having all these seasons of being on television was what got him elected and what got him these followers who think that they know him, and also became inured to seeing him as a leader or a
Mm-hmm.
boss figure. I don't know what, I don't watch TV. So it was like 14 seasons. But so I started to, frustrated with the lies, I started to buy counterfeit mega hats because I didn't want to put money in his pockets. And I ripped them apart, which was cathartic in and of itself. One day I went down and ripped them in front of the White House, and there
Mm.
were 3 layers of fence between the Trump White House and me. And then I started to reconfigure them into shapes that I thought told the real truth about the racism behind um, this man, and the sexism, and how uh, he was affecting our culture. And so I did a handmaid's bonnet out of white mega hats, and I did a KKK hood. The KKK hood was the first one. I did a Nazi armband where the swastika is from a black hat, so the letters are actually following along with the swastika, "Make America Great Again." And then I took one hat and ripped it to shreds. There was nothing left of it. It was just a pile of threads. And um, so it was all very cathartic, but it was, full of rage, as you said,
Mm.
for me. And then I started to think about, well, what is a positive way that I could look at this, and how could I flip it, And so I got a very large flag. I think it's, I don't know, 4 by 6 feet. I'm sorry, I don't know meters, but and I started to rip out all the hand or all the machine sewn white stars, and then I replaced them with hand sewn stars in the colors of the melanin scale that represents all America, which is supposed to be a melting pot, right?
Mm.
And so um, that it took me 550 hours to make that piece.
Right.
Uh, Machine sewing, where they're sewing from the front and the back at the same time, is like excruciating to pull out, especially if you don't want to rip the fabric underneath. And so,
Mm.
um, and the title is very important to that piece. And now I'm going to try to remember it. I know it's reparation. Um,
Where our greatness lies.
Thank you so much. I knew it was more poetic than that. And but anyway, uh and I really thought about the white stars as being even though that's not what the stars symbolize, I really thought about the white stars as, supposedly representing the 50 states, but then they were all white. And I thought of them as representing white supremacism.
Mm,
And so that's why I was ripping them out. And that's why I was replacing them with skin tones that reflect our population much more. Um, and it's a really important piece for me, but I finished it kind of at the tail end of the pandemic, and I finished it when I was starting my book, and so I haven't had a lot of time to promote it, but it's a piece that rolls up. And so my vision for the piece is to have it, because it travels super easy, is to have it just travel around in a tube. And most museums have one wall someplace where they put stuff. And I just wanted people to see themselves represented in the
mm,
flag. If you saw any footage of January 6th, the coup, um, against our government, that all these patriots were wielding this flag and they were beating people with it, and the
mm,
meaning has changed.
mm,
So, you know, if you live in the US and you're driving down the road and you see somebody with a flag sticker on their big truck, you're kind of like, oh, okay, and you step back a little
mm.
bit. Um, and that's not right, that it's come to I'm not advocating for that we change our flag, but I just felt like I wanted to do something. And I suppose, since I was raised Catholic, it might be a penance of sorts, since it was a 550-hour project.
Because there's a sort of trade-off. Like we have sort of similar thing over here. I think sometimes the Union Jack is used in situations that don't have a very good vibe. And I
Uh-huh.
think that it's that trade off, because being patriotic about your country is one thing, but when the story of your country changes, it's quite hard to perhaps maintain the same sense of pride. Or,
Mhm.
like, I've had conversation with Dr. Isabella Rossner, who's curator at the Royal School of Needlework, and she was talking, we
Mhm.
were talking about the people who used to be in Los Angeles, but like 400 years ago, all of those kind of
Mhm.
stories. And what the patriotism of that version of America is in relation to what we have now. And yeah, it's
Mhm.
funny, isn't it? It's quite hard to negotiate a path through that can say, I'm proud of America, but not the America that is being
Yes.
pushed out on the media channels. Trying to find that nuance.
Right.
You've identified, or you've it seems as though this work has unwittingly plugged into a broader theme of bully culture, which is something that you've talked about as well. Is that something you expected, or have you just looked back and gone, oh,
Well, bully culture started as a series of work, um, that I thought would be like any other series of work, but I guess when you've been researching it for over a decade and making the stuff for 8 years, it's kind of become my work. But um, I think the bully culture work started when, around the time my daughter was born, or right after she was born. And um, I don't know, I'm a bit removed from popular culture. I'm not a total Luddite, but I don't follow pop culture very, very much. So it was that I started to look around me and I started to see television shows and just things on t-shirts and things like that I realized showed a kind of aggressiveness and um, competitiveness, which I can't get into it too much. I'm hoping to write a book about it, but people say kind of justify bad behavior
mm,
by citing Darwin and survival of the fittest. But the fact is that we've evolved more because of cooperation than we have competition.
Mm.
that we can come together and, build things and, do things. And um, so took a hard look, and because I'm not steeped in it, I have sort of an alien view of um, a lot of what I see around me. And so, I started to see, well, there's moms who don't want their kids to be bullied on the playground, but they're watching, I don't know if you know this, Housewives of, there's a
Yeah,
series
yeah,
called
yeah. Yeah.
Housewives of, and
Hmm.
they're fighting each other. I mean, it's ridiculous, And to a certain extent, sports culture is a part of this, and
Mm.
how we divide ourselves up into tribes, and we're, let's beat the hell out of them and whatever. But um so I started making this work, and uh you know it really took me over, and I started making things that I could never have imagined I would make.
Mm.
And this really helped me with my book, because I'd always sort of listened to the universe a little bit before, but this was just like, I was making so many pieces. I was so prolific for years and years, and um some of the stuff that I made scared me. The way I describe it is, I would invite friends over for a studio visit, and it wasn't to have a cup of tea and say, "Oh, this is nice." It was like for us to look at it and say, "What is this, and where did it come from, and what do you think?" Because it really was like a meteor that crashed into my studio, and then we're standing there looking at it, and we're like, "Oh my gosh, this is really intense." And I started surveying my Facebook friends and saying, "Have you ever seen art that's too intense?"
Mm.
And, the answer is, for a lot of people, yes. Not really among my artist friends, but people who might see the work. Um, it was addressing a lot of difficult subjects, and I did research on the subjects, and I had, like, dog fighting and things like that, because they're all like a part of it. And just like rape culture, there are degrees of it. you know
Mm.
a joke about a woman, you know nobody's going to come up and police you, but it's a slippery slope
Mm.
into more violent behavior, and it's a slippery slope into being a bystander, because that's not about me. And
It's like boiling a frog, isn't it?
yes. I love that analogy. Yeah, so I was making the bully culture work, and then we had our 2016 election, Clinton versus Trump, and you know, I'm a pretty hardcore feminist, but I kept saying to people, our country is too misogynistic to elect a woman president. And my feminist friends were really angry at me, and I'm like, I'm not, I don't think that's true, but I see this. I've been studying this for years and years, and this is the way it is. So I was, people got really mad at me, but I kind of saw it. And
Mm.
then it happened, and people were shocked. And then I started thinking, oh my God, this is the manifestation of what I've been making work about for, at that point, 6 or 7 years. So I just sort of folded it in, and it'll probably be my work for the rest of my life. I have no way of knowing that. Um,
What's incredible, there's two incredible things. One is it's incredible that in a country of however many people live in America, that the presidential choices in 2024 are the 82-year-old you've already got,
right.
or
Yeah.
the orange guy you've had before who's known. Like, it's incredible that that's your choice. And I think a lot of people outside of that are just baffled by the system. But drawing a line, what's interesting to me then is a lot of this work, like you say, you're making work, it scares you. You're making work that is looking at the world around you and just recognizing the challenges that you face. And then you write a book that is almost like a kind of Excalibur. It's almost like you're giving people a sword with which maybe they can cleave their way through this madness.
I love that. Wow. I have to think about that. I really love that idea, but, it is. I mean, because, I talk about using work to, um, shape our world, and so I guess I was sort of pushed to make the work or the book in a certain way because it's we got all these gathering storm clouds, and if you want to be an entrepreneur and sell happy stuff, that's great. I have it all over my walls. I don't live with the work that I make. I've made work for museums since I started making work. I've never, I live with some of the easier pieces that I've made, but I surround myself with pretty happy stuff.
Mm.
And um but it is in a way a reminder that um God, the pandemic and fascism rising all over the world. Wake up, everybody! We are people that can do something about this.
Mm. Did the book, so you said the book was somewhat inspired by your professional career, the things you teach people. Was the book
Hmm.
always going to come out, or was it like, 5, 6 years ago, someone said, "Do you want to write a book?" and it went like that?
It's God, it started. I'm trying to think what year it might have been. I was teaching at Florida International University in Miami from 1995 to 2005, and we used to have this spring review or something where all the art majors had 15 minutes in front of the full faculty, and there were always some students that were lost. They didn't know what to make art about, and we had never told them how to figure out what to make art about. And then there were people that, we would kind of talk amongst ourselves in a kind way and say, what are we going to do about so and so, right? So we're having beer afterwards in the pub, and I'm like, I I want to start a boot camp. And so the people who are lost are the people who keep, making work that is sort of cliche or whatever, write them a script and they'll come to me for a weekend, and I'll like do a boot camp, which is again kind of like therapy. It's sort of stripping away bad stuff and then building you into what you know um you might want to be. So that's how it started, and that was a long time ago, 20 years ago, and so then I started to come up with exercises almost immediately, and I started to incorporate it into my classes that I taught at FIU because I was the BFA director. I was the last person to see everyone before they graduated, and I was helping them put up their senior shows and such. So I started to incorporate it into that. And then I moved up north, and I was teaching a drawing practicum course, which was very much about finding your voice in drawing, in the drawing medium, although a lot of people left doing needlework. But yeah, so then I incorporated, and then I was really seeing that this was working, and I started to offer workshops when I was a visiting artist. Um, and I just got a lot of good feedback, and it occurred to me that I should make it into a book. And I think that idea first occurred to me maybe 8 years ago. And but all along, because I was teaching classes and doing the workshops, I've been collecting all of this information, and I've been reading artist biographies. And so um, it was kind of natural that it become a book.
Mm.
The more I started to think about how higher art education is developing, the more I thought this needs to be a class that's taught in every art school, because a lot of artists are now interdisciplinary. And so what stays constant? Their voice. So
Mm.
if they're going to sculpt and they're going to paint and they're going to, let this not be something that's sort of off on the side. It normally happens when you have a critique in whatever class and somebody says, oh, this isn't working, or go look at this artist, or, and I just think it needs to be a foundation. It needs to be part of, building yourself as an artist. And so the book evolved too. It started as a manifestation of the class, and then I started to think about, I'm old and I have very little to lose, and so I've taken a lot of chances in the book. I've told, like I do with everything that I do, I've told a lot of truths, and I've exposed some cognitive dissonance inherent in the life of an artist, um and that I at a certain point, because of the whole like how to make a living and versus voice, I just decided I'm going to be an advocate for people's voices. I'm going to address the making a living part because it would, you can't not,
Mm.
but I can't do a lot of, make a lot of qualifying remarks here and there and everywhere saying, of course, if you want to do this. I just said at the beginning, I am an advocate for your voice. And I'm going to say a lot of things about our culture, even about art education, that some people aren't going to like, but I really believe this, and I feel like it's backed up with many years of teaching. And I decided I'm going to make the book that I wish somebody had handed me at the beginning of my career.
Mm.
So that's sort of how it ended up. And people that have read it have said it's kind of like having a beer with your professor and everything's off the record. You know what I mean?
I think it's
So,
fantastic. I mean, like I say, what I need to do is I need to get a good physical copy of it, and then I can have it as a bedtime read. But to me, it's up there. It's such a good book, and I think the thing is like you say, it's kind of non-medium specific, and I think that makes it all the better because, like,
mhm.
it also reminds me a bit of the War of Art, Stephen
Yes,
Pressfield,
I
one of
I
those.
love that book.
But
Yeah.
also, I don't know whether have you read The Creative Act by Rick Rubin?
It's on my to-read list.
So I
It's
got
literally sitting next to my bed right
yeah, yeah,
now.
yeah.
And
So,
I know who this person is, because of other contexts, but yeah,
because of your
I'm
massive
looking
hip
forward
hop
to it.
career, I, but I got the audio version of that which he's reading, and again, it's another one
Uh-huh.
of those. I think sometimes what's great about these books and yours is that you don't have to be an artist to get the takeaway from it, but it might just
Mhm.
encourage you to pay a bit more attention and to put a bit more beauty into the things you do anyway. So although
Mhm.
you can pursue an artistic career, as I said before, you might just make really nice Welsh cakes. But this might just make you feel at peace with that because you don't feel like you're missing
Mhm.
out because you're not striving to make the greatest Welsh cake in history, that kind of thing. And I think it's really important. It's a really good book. And I think that people should definitely, if there was one takeaway, there was one
Oh
takeaway from the
boy,
book for like
the elevator
anybody
speech.
listening, just the one. Because I mean, the thing is there are like hundreds of takeaways. I mean,
Mhm.
you've got your four
Right.
sections: fundamentals of voice, clear the obstacles, build the
Mhm.
core, intensify the vision. You've got those, and as you say, people should work through the book and then come back and start the book again. But what's one thing that will really set people on the right track?
Um, you have something to say that other people cannot say because they are not you, and you're passing through this world once, and you've got this shot to find out who you are and what you can contribute to that world.
I love that. I love that. I completely agree with that. I think somebody on this planet is the world's best lollipop lady, and they just
Yes.
someone's got to be. They wouldn't be there for a reason. I love that. Right, good. I'm going to pivot onto maybe more difficult questions. I couldn't really
Okay.
say, but we'll give it a whirl. We'll see how it goes. Do you have a favorite band / album?
Oh, see, I like I like some bands like, I'm old, so I love Queen, for example. I listen to Queen all the
That
time.
makes me
But
sound old because I like them. The age under it.
but, I listen mostly to singer-songwriters who are, it's coming like all from them,
Hmm.
which kind of makes sense to me, the art from the core. And my favorite album is, and this question's really hard to answer, but uh I would say an album called Mortal City from a singer named Dar Williams.
Okay.
um she's she's a feminist, but she's very funny, and you know uh some of her work's really lighthearted, but really deep work as well.
Could you say what genre it is?
It's singer-songwriter. It's a person with a guitar,
Right, right,
basically,
right. Nice.
and that's primarily who I listen to, I think, those kinds of but I listen to a lot of stuff.
Do you listen while you work?
Often, but I have to listen to music that I already know. And I can listen to nonfiction, but I can't listen to fiction for some
Mm.
reason.
No,
My
I can.
brain doesn't, but it's like what divides your brain and what does not cause any ripples in it.
Yeah, I can imagine it'd be quite annoying trying to do some emails listening to Dar Williams because every now and again you'd just be looking out the window thinking
Oh
about
yeah,
what she's
it's
singing
beautiful.
about.
It's beautiful. And and I'm a lyrics person too. So, yeah,
I love that. I
I
love that.
couldn't do
That's very good. Okay, very good. Do you
that.
have art from your core, notwithstanding? Do you have a
Right.
favorite book?
I'm an incessant reader. I often have 3 books going at the same time. I'm trying to think. Um,
We can pivot and say what was the last good book you read, if that's any easier.
the last good book I read, I'll never remember the name, but it's called, I think it's called An Education, and it's a memoir of someone who came from a dysfunctional poor family and kind of, you know, struggled and made something of herself, but keeps getting kind of sucked back into the dysfunctionality. Um, I've read To Kill a Mockingbird more than one time. I've read a really sappy book that I'm embarrassed to say, but I would be lying if I didn't. Um, a Bridge Across Forever by Richard Bach. And
Hmm.
that's a love story. And it's a very kind of, you know, almost spiritual love
Like
story. And
Jonathan
Richard,
Livingston Seagull, isn't it?
yes,
It's one of
exactly.
those
That's the
metaphors.
same
Yeah,
guy,
yeah.
but he's also a pilot, and I love being in the air. So
Okay.
he often describes flying. So that's another one that I read.
Is
I've
the
read several
education one, is
times.
that by Lynn Barber? Is it that one?
It might be. It might
Yeah,
be. I'm so bad with names, especially since the pandemic. I don't know why.
that's fine.
My
I'm
brain
Googling it.
is
But I
okay.
mean, I read To Kill a Mockingbird last year, and I think
Did you really?
I'd never read it before, and it
Oh,
was like the best book I read last year. I absolutely loved it.
it's amazing. And did you
Mm.
see the movie? Because it's beautiful.
No, you see, I
Have
haven't,
you seen the
and
film?
no, I mean, I might watch it now, but sometimes with books like that, I prefer. It's like with Harry Potter. Harry Potter's kind of been
Yeah, yeah,
ruined
yeah.
because you can't
Yeah.
Daniel
Right.
Radcliffe it, can you? But
Right.
I
But
loved it.
I often show um just the opening credits of To Kill a Mockingbird to my students, because just watch the credits.
Hmm.
It's so beautifully done. Um and but yes, it's a thing with me. I've named all my pets after characters in To Kill a Mockingbird, and
Nice.
you know,
I just
it's
the
it
thing
our
I think
our family watched
I think the thing I liked as well is it just made me chuckle every now and again, and I think you
it.
need that
Mhm.
in amongst everything else.
Oh,
It was just quite
yes.
chucklicious, and yeah,
Right.
it was a real winner. Just this is an aside. Me and my wife have started watching Poker Face, which is
Oh, I don't know that.
it's a Natasha Lyonne TV show where she's someone who can
Oh,
kind of
okay.
tell where people are lying. But one of the
Oh,
things I like
okay.
the most about it is they have the credits
Uh-huh.
at the start. And it's a bit like 1970s font and stuff like that, but it's almost like they list
Uh-huh.
all the names of the people just as the opening scene kind of plays out. And it's just like it's
Oh,
weirdly
right.
retro, but I very much appeals
Yeah.
to me
I love her. I should probably check that out.
It's pretty funny. Like we're only 1.5 episodes in, but and
Hmm.
also it's written and directed by the guy who did the Glass Onion films. Is it Glass
Okay.
Onion?
All right.
No. What is it? The
I
Knife.
don't know.
Ah, this is a great bit of conversation here where all the facts go out the window, isn't it? It's like the Knives Out. Oh God, Rian Johnson, Knives Out. They're two good films with like Daniel
Oh,
Craig as
Knives
a
Out. Yeah.
yeah. So he wrote that, and then
Yeah.
this is his TV show. So it's of a good caliber.
Oh, okay. Cool. Cool.
We managed to recover that situation. Do you, do you have in that case, do you have a favorite film?
Hmm. Absolutely, Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders is my favorite film.
Mm, mm,
Hands down. I mean, I watch a lot of movies, but that it takes you in. Uh, you're just in a different space through the whole film, and it's I don't know. I find it transformative. Some people fall asleep when they try to watch it. You shouldn't watch it when you're tired
right.
because it's dreamy. It's just
Uh,
it transports you, but it's just so gorgeous, and the message is wonderful, and um,
have you
that's
seen any of
that's it.
the? Because this year seemed to be a pretty good film year from an Oscars standpoint. There were some pretty powerhouse films, not many of which I've
Hmm.
seen yet. But it feels like you might have seen some of like your zones of interest or your past
Oh,
biases.
Zone. I've seen Zone of Interest, which was just I feel like a masterpiece. It was just um the the subtlety and the examination of character and personality. It's mind-blowing.
Mm,
um I love Poor Things.
right.
That is, you know to my mind, that was I'm going to go back and watch that 5 or 6 times.
Okay.
I like films that really make me think. And I watched Oppenheimer right before the Oscars, so I haven't even fully processed that. It's definitely an important film. Um, and then I don't know which others I've seen. I've seen American Fiction. I enjoyed that. Um,
I enjoyed American Fiction. I watched it the other day, but I'd read Erasure by Percival
oh,
Everett,
okay.
and
Hmm.
it took a bit of going through, but I really enjoyed. Like I've read a couple of his books, and I really enjoyed that. So I thought
Right.
American Fiction was good, but I think the book
Hmm.
was better. And but to be honest,
Uh-huh.
Barbie's the only other one I've seen at this
Oh,
point.
okay.
But I've got
Hmm.
but all of them are on my list. It's just the thing is on a
Yeah,
Friday,
me
on a
too.
Saturday night, you're like, so shall we watch a film about some
Right.
people who live next to Auschwitz? That's a no, is it? Okay, let's not watch
Right.
it. It's
I
not the
know, I
easiest
know,
sell in
I
the
know.
first place, isn't it?
It's not.
You've got to be in the right headspace
Um,
for it. Very good. Okay, one
exactly.
more question. Can you tell me an interesting fact that not a lot of people know about Kate Kretz?
Um, okay. Well, a lot of people know this after the book comes out, but right now, hardly anybody knows that I'm a collector of in-air experiences. I love being up in the air. So I've been up in gliders. I've been up in helicopters. One of my ex-boyfriends actually finagled a way for me to go up in the blimp, which I was so thrilled with because it's open. You're in a cage, but there's no glass, so you're really out in the air. I've done some skydiving. I've learned to pilot a plane, and so that is my secret passion. And the one thing that I'm really looking forward to is the hot air balloon ride, because I haven't done that yet. I almost did it and we were rained out or whatever, but that's kind of the next on my list.
I love that. A collective in-air experiences. I wasn't sure where you were going with that at first. I was like, what does that mean?
All these, whenever I'm on an airplane, I'm like, just commercial flying. I'm like the only one who's acting like an 8-year-old, like looking out the window, and like I'm trying to gauge how fast we're going and when are we gonna get the lift, and, I still love it,
Mm.
I'm still fascinated by it no matter how many times I fly.
I'd love to. I've not been up in a helicopter, but I'd love to have a go because I feel like to me that one feels like the coolest one. It's like the
It
nimblest
is
one.
because you do this, right? You go back and forth like this while you're flying, and you even do some of this.
Mm.
Sorry, the audience can't see that, but
But
back
it's
back
very
and
groovy.
forth, and you're sort of swinging back and forth and side to side as you're moving forward, so it's really
I've
a
got a
rush,
vague suggestion for you, which might work or it might not. There's a YouTube channel called Circle with an E, and what they do is they get DJs who play music sets in interesting locations. And there's
Oh.
one and they do them in some really lovely places. There's one of a pianist who's doing a live piano performance in what appears to be a lake in Iceland underneath the Northern Lights. There's loads of these
Oh,
sorts of things.
wow.
But they have a guy called Ben Bomer, Bohmer, and he does kind of, I don't know what it is, like melodic house music or something like that. But basically,
Mhm.
he's DJing in a hot air balloon over Turkey. And it's just
Oh
this combination of
my,
like lovely music and lovely
wow.
visuals. So you should
I'm
definitely
writing
check that
that
out because
down.
it's just a really nice combo.
Right.
Because there's something about hot air balloons that you just kind of want to look at them, don't you? You just kind of,
Yeah,
it's very good.
yeah.
So that might be a nice one. I like that. Anytime I see
Mhm.
someone doing something on the Vomit Comet now, I will think of Kate Kretz. It's probably next on your list. Hey, Kate, thanks for having a needle exchange with me.
Well, it's been a marvelous experience. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.